and even abroad. And this is in honor of my friend who's come over specially from Paris, Luke.
Okay.
So,
Bienvenue.
and he's going to be on the radio with me tomorrow at Brighton and Hove Community Radio as my guest. So this little story, it's all true, is called Tutus in Paris. I came to live in Paris without social connections when I was about 30 in 1977. Don't ask me how old I am today. After having lived for 6 months in Mexico, I quickly realized that walking into an art gallery opening in Saint-Germain, the art district on the left bank, around 7 o'clock, was the best place to meet interesting people. One Wednesday evening, I picked a known Russian artist's vernissage opening, dressed up, and off I strode, a little nervous as I knew almost no one in Paris, the city of lights. I knew very little about the Parisian art world, but loved the Impressionists and the Fauves. Mihail Chemyakin was a professional artist and very fashionable in Paris. The gallery was packed with branché guests, so no one could hardly view his paintings displayed on the wall. It was a place just to be seen and not heard. Tired and alone in a crowd of posh people, I sat on a sofa next to a distinguished, much older gentleman who was looking bored and detached. "And what's your opinion of the paintings?" I inquired innocently. What do you think of them?" He glanced at me sideways, uninterested, until he heard my obvious English accent. I was speaking in French. He suddenly perked up, explaining he'd lived for many years in London in the 50s as Baron's photographic assistant. A baron who died in 1965 had been the famous London Society photographer. He rose and took me, young gauche Jilliana in hand, introducing me to his Russian friend that all of Paris was talking about. He proudly introduced himself as Zhenya from Moscow, a Russian émigré. Never had I met one before, or for that matter since. I confided in Zhenya I had just arrived in Paris and was living in Montparnasse, and I knew absolutely no one. And Zhenya was very knowledgeable in the arts, and when I told him the street I was living on, he said that Modigliani had committed suicide, throwing himself out of his studio window. Being my protector for the evening, and as it was early, Zhenya suggested, after a surprise dinner, we should pay a visit to his old friend, the German fashion photographer, Willy Mewald, at his studio in the Rue Grand Chaumière, who hosted salons on Wednesdays and Saturday nights. He went to make a phone call to ask if the salon was on, asking the person who answered the phone if it was on. "Mais oui," was the reply. So off we went into the night, taking a taxi and chatting about art and photography, which I knew absolutely nothing about. I had come to Paris to be educated, and educated I was over the coming years. We arrived at Willy's studio, which was hidden at the end of a secret garden, tucked away in a famous street for its art school. Zhenya opened the unlocked door, and we entered a private world. There was elderly, distinguished Willy on his couch in an original artist's atelier with a high glass roof. His black and white portraits of famous artists such as Chagall, Picasso, and Braque adorned the walls. Willy, in his element, was surrounded by Spanish transvestites, wearing shocking pink tutus. Well, not all of them. Some had long evening dresses in garish colours, others dressed in bling and little else. wearing wigs and very heavy makeup. Even some had fresh flowers in their hair. Everyone was laughing and speaking Spanish very loudly, so I joined in. The outrageous, fun-loving party guests were all shapes and sizes and looking fabulous. Jilliana and I realized we had gate-crashed a private birthday party for a cabaret singer called Carla, who was swanning around and hitting the high notes. Willie rose to greet me in English with a heavy, guttural German accent. Jilliana, you've come on the wrong night. Bring Jilliana on a Saturday night. I think she would prefer that. He nodded and smiled at me knowingly. A charming man who was later to be rediscovered at the end of his long life as a recognized black and white portrait and fashion photographer. Jilliana suggested we leave as he'd just been propositioned by one of the guests on his way to the bathroom. He assured me women were his preference. We left and he accompanied me to my nearby abode. However, he hovered at the heavy wooden front door, waiting to be invited in for who knows what, saying he was lonely and looking for a relationship. I thanked him for the evening and we agreed to meet on Saturday for the salon, but made certain he understood there would be no relationship. Willie Meval, the fashion photographer of Dior's new look, was the catalyst for my new life in Paris, although he never knew how his Saturday salons would educate me, giving me self-confidence that I lacked and leading me to find my new identity. Thank you very much.